Ian Kenneth Bailey was born in Manchester, England in 1959. He worked as a freelance journalist for several English newspapers before moving to West Cork in 1991. He moved in with his partner Jules Thomas and her 3 daughters in Toormoor, County Cork. Sophie Toscan Du Plantier was born in Paris, in France in 1957. She was a French television producer who travelled to Ireland on multiple occasions in her teens. In 1993, she purchased a cottage in Jornan, Toormoor, West Cork. The cottage was to be used as a holiday home, which she would frequently visit over the next few years. On Friday, the 20th of December 1996, Sophie flew from Paris to Cork for a holiday in her cottage. At approximately 4:30 p.m., she arrived at her home. Sophie's housekeeper, Josephine Helen, called Sophie at around 4:45 p.m. to ensure that everything was okay and that she had arrived home safely. Sophie informed Josephine that she was okay. On Sunday, the 22nd of December 1996, at approximately 10 p.m., Josephine called Sophie to check up on her. In this phone call, Sophie informed Josephine of her plan to return to France on Christmas Eve to meet her husband, Daniel Toscan Du Plantier. At some point between 11 and 12 p.m., Sophie spoke with her husband Daniel on the phone, who was in southern France at the time. Daniel, her husband, is the last known person to have spoken to Sophie. On Monday, the 23rd of December 1996, at around 10 a.m., Sophie's neighbour, Shirley Foster, found her body at the bottom of the gate at the laneway leading up to her house. Foster then notified the Gardaí, and at approximately 11 a.m., Dr. Larry O'Connor pronounced Sophie dead. Her body was badly beaten, and she had sustained severe injuries to her head. As of 2023, nobody has been charged in Ireland with the murder of Sophie Toscan Du Plantier. Shortly after the Garda investigation into Sophie's death was launched, the list of suspects was narrowed significantly, culminating in the Gardaí identifying Ian Bailey as the prime suspect in the case. Ian and his partner Jules Thomas were arrested on suspicion of murder and questioned by the Gardaí on multiple occasions. However, there was insufficient evidence to charge either of these 2 individuals with Sophie's murder, and this case remains unsolved. Before discussing the case, the following is a brief description of the law dealing with murder in Ireland. Irish law operates under a common law system, similar to that of the United Kingdom, Australia, and Canada. Criminal offences differ from civil wrongdoings, which are known as torts in Irish law, in that the standard of proof that is required for an individual to be found guilty differs between the 2. The standard of proof in civil cases is the balance of probabilities. This means that the person must show that it is more probable than not that the facts are as they allege. The standard of proof in criminal cases is significantly higher. It must be proven beyond reasonable doubt that the individual or individuals are guilty of the offence. If there is a reasonable doubt as to the guilt of the accused, they must be acquitted. The higher threshold is due to the severity of criminal offences and the potential impact a conviction may have on people's lives. The term homicide covers the crimes of murder and manslaughter. For an individual to be convicted of murder, it must be proven that they carried out any action which hastened the death of the deceased. An intention to kill or cause serious injury must also be established. Murder carries a mandatory life sentence in Ireland.
Yeah, so my name is Ian Kenneth Bailey. I'm by background a journalist, more latterly a law, UCC law student. As everybody is pretty well fully aware now, 26 years ago there was a crime committed in West Cork. I was a journalist. I started to report on the crime. It was a murder most foul
Yeah.
And a false narrative was created by bad guards then, most of them who are now dead, and the false narrative was that they tried to put me in the frame for a crime I had nothing to do with, and for 26 years now I've been trying to clear my name.
The investigation. The evidence collated by the Gardaí throughout the investigation into Bailey was circumstantial evidence. The Gardaí investigating the case took hair and DNA samples from Ian, as well as his fingerprints. However, his DNA and fingerprints were not found anywhere at the crime scene. On the 31st of December 1996, Bailey made a statement to the Gardaí describing his movements after midnight on December 22nd. He continued to write articles about the murder for various different newspapers.
So back in February of 1997, that's 26 years ago, myself and my partner were both arrested in February and accused of the crime.
Yeah.
And a lot of things were taken from the house in the searches. And then the following year, in January of 1998, I was arrested for a second time and accused of a crime I had nothing to do with.
Yeah.
My partner was subsequently arrested for a second time a few years later, as was one of her daughters as well.
On January 11th and January 21st, 1997, Marie Farrell made 2 phone calls to the Gardaí, following an appeal for witnesses on Crime Line. She claimed that she saw a man wearing a black coat at Kelfada Bridge at approximately 3 a.m. on the night that Sophie was murdered. She added that she believed she saw the man washing his boots in the river, and later identified this individual as Ian Bailey. However, in April 2005, Marie Farrell withdrew her statements. She said that she was coerced into giving these statements by the Gardaí and was cognizant of the fact that these statements were false. On February 10, 1997, Bailey and Thomas were arrested in connection to the murder. They were then questioned by the Gardaí. After being questioned about their movements around the time that the murder took place, they were then released without charge. Later that year, on the 29th of September, the Gardaí submitted a murder file to the Director of Public Prosecutions. Following further deliberation, no charges were brought.
The guards of the day were trying to make a case against me, and they put a file up to the DPP.
Yeah.
The DPP repeatedly rejected the file, and in fact in 2001 commissioned a report into the whole investigation, and they completely rejected the case that the guards had tried to make against me.
Bailey was then arrested on his birthday on the 27th of January 1998. He was questioned by the Gardaí, but yet again was released without charge. In 2001, the Director of Public Prosecutions released a report analysing the evidence submitted by the Gardaí linking Ian Bailey to the murder of Sophie Toscan Du Plantier. The report highlighted that, quote, no forensic evidence linking Ian Bailey to the scene was found despite the fact that the murder of Sophie Toscan Du Plantier was the direct result of an apparently frenzied and furious attack on her in a prior strewn location. It was noted that Bailey provided a blood sample, despite the fact that he was under no legal obligation to do so. In the murder file submitted to the Director of Public Prosecutions, the Gardaí alleged that Bailey was being untruthful and evasive regarding his knowledge of Sophie Toscan Du Plantier. This report then found that this was, quote, not supported by convincing evidence. The report noted that Marie Farrell was an unreliable witness, and the evidence brought forward by her should not be relied upon. Gardaí were alleged to have given money, clothes, and drugs to a man by the name of Martin Graham as a means of obtaining incriminating evidence against Bailey. A transcript of a conversation between Graham and a member of the Gardaí featured in the report. Garda Jim Fitzgerald was quoted saying, quote, There is a bit of money there, Martin. Cash and a few smokes in case you go to the pub, you know. It is inside there with the smokes. I've no smokes here. I will give you a big bit and you can look after it yourself. The evidence brought forward by the Gardaí relied on evidence from Malachy Reid, who got a lift from Bailey on the 4th of February 1997. Reid stated that Bailey told him he, quote, smashed her brains in with a rock or stone. However, the DPP report found that Reid, quote, turned a conversation which had not apparently up until then alarmed him into something sinister, following a conversation with the Gardaí. The DPP report concluded that, quote, a prosecution against Bailey is not warranted by the evidence.
There was definitely an atmosphere of sort of xenophobia in the first arrest, and they were saying, do you think an English person's going to get away with doing this over here? And I was probably a little bit brash as well, looking back, coming out of London. But there was a definite conspiracy to pervert the course of justice. And what happens is a police force, maybe under pressure, maybe not completely evil, but decide that they need to come up with people to put the blame on.
Yeah.
And that was the same case with me, but I was the West Cork 1, if you like, and the evidence was always rejected.
Say you were a native of West Cork, you grew up in Skibbereen or something, do you think that you would have been treated differently?
That's hypothetical, and I tend not to comment on hypothetical things, but...
But do you think that, I think was
an outsider.
Yeah.
I think there was a degree of jealousy and envy about me because apparently I used to be tall, dark and handsome.
In December 2003, Bailey initiated defamation proceedings against 8 newspapers over their reporting, which linked Bailey to the murder of Sophie Toscan Du Plantier. He won 2 cases and lost the other 6. However, the statements of Marie Farrell, which were later retracted in 2005, were heavily relied upon in the trial. It is entirely possible that without Farrell's evidence, Bailey would have been successful in all 8 cases. On the 28th of March 2011, Bailey was ordered by the High Court to surrender to the French authorities on foot of a European warrant for his arrest. Bailey appealed this order successfully in 2012, with the Supreme Court blocking this extradition. Following this, he submitted a complaint to GSOC, the Garda Síochána Ombudsman Commission. The Garda Síochána Ombudsman Report was published in 2018. The report found that there was evidence of, quote, a lack of administration and management of aspects of the investigation into the murder. However, the inquiry did not find evidence of high-level Garda corruption that was alleged by Bailey and Thomas. Further, there was no evidence that Marie Farrell had been coerced into making statements by the Gardaí. GSOC identified missing original statements and exhibits relating to the initial investigation as a matter of grave concern. GSOC reported that a number of Gardaí were, quote, less than cooperative during the inquiry, which made it impossible to fully establish certain details pertaining to the arrests of Thomas and Bailey. There were also numerous missing pages in the books known as Jobs books, which chronicled the Garda investigation into Sophie's murder. These books, quote, form a complete record of all activity undertaken in respect of a major or critical incident, along with the rationale for the decisions made. Specific pages were missing from an area of the book where Bailey was first identified as a suspect in the case. These books were hard-backed and pages were glued in at the book's spine. The report noted that, quote, as a result, it would not be possible for pages to simply fall out of the book by accident, and for them to be removed, this would have had to have been a deliberate act. The Gardaí did not provide an explanation as to why these pages were removed. Bailey was tried for murder in France in absentia. He did not attend the trial and was thus unable to respond to allegations that were put forward against him by the French authorities. A guilty verdict was handed down following deliberation by 3 French magistrates. On the 31st of May 2019, the French court found Ian Bailey guilty of murder and sentenced him to 25 years in prison. The French case heavily relied on evidence which was outright rejected by the Director of Public Prosecutions in Ireland and regarded to be insufficient to merely charge Ian Bailey, let alone convict him with murder. The court relied on statements that were submitted by Marie Farrell, which she later retracted herself. Bailey's solicitor, Frank Buttimer, described the trial as, quote, a show trial for the purpose of satisfying certain persons in relation to their own beliefs in relation to the matter.
The French system of law is quite different from our common law system of law. It doesn't require the same degrees of proof or evidential thresholds. In fact, basically, if you're accused in French law, you are guilty unless you can absolutely prove you're innocent. It's the opposite way around to our system. We objected to that warrant, and eventually we were successful, and the judge handed down a very, very strong judgment that I should not be handed over to the French. And then I was subjected to a 3rd European arrest warrant. I've been arrested 3. I'm the only person in the world who's been arrested on 3 occasions on a European arrest warrant, and defeated the warrant under domestic Irish law. And I'd known for many years that this was a likely possibility that I would finish up getting prosecuted in France in my absence, and it came to pass, and I was sentenced to 25 years.
Am I right in saying that they used some of your personal diaries as
Yeah,
evidence?
they did. They took all my personal writings. A lot of it was absolute rubbish, but I mean, just stuff I'd written over the years, and
yeah,
it was misinterpreted, and they tried to put certain sort of spins on it, and eventually, did I ever get it back? I got a lot of it back, but some of it I never got back. And that was then handed over in its entirety to the French authorities. The cold case review, which is ongoing as we are talking here.
When did that review start, do you know?
Well, I wrote to Drew Harris in June of last, I've got to get the years right here, June of the year before, pointing out to him as a clean pair of hands the background story, and asking him if he would commit to a cold case review, and he then considered that, and there was a long consideration period, and then I think it was in June of last year I got a letter saying there will be a cold case review, and would I cooperate with it, and I responded yes, I would. Now at the time we're talking here, I haven't been approached by the new investigation team, but I'm perfectly happy to cooperate with them. I'm very sympathetic to the family. I know the family. You see, from day one, pretty well the get-go, they put me in the frame, and they told the French authorities, we know who it was.
Yeah.
And that person they're referring to was myself.
Yeah.
So the French family have actually bought this this false narrative. I'm sympathetic to them. I just hope, my prayer is that as part of this new investigation, and there was DNA, there was apparently blood found on her, not on her body, but on her clothing.
That wasn't hers.
That wasn't hers, that wasn't mine.
Yeah.
That might actually lead to the identification of the killer.
Another thing that also stuck out to me was that you voluntarily gave blood and DNA samples.
Well, the first one, so New Year's Eve of 1996, Jules, myself, and her daughter, I think, no, maybe not, Jules and myself gave hair and finger samples.
Yeah.
And then when I was arrested, on the first occasion, I gave a blood sample. Now, I don't know if I had the right to refuse. I probably had the right to refuse a blood sample.
And you did it off your own volition.
But I said, yeah, take it, match it against any, evidence that you've got, and you will find it won't match mine. And I don't know if that actually happened, but it certainly didn't match mine. The sample of blood that they found, it obviously wasn't mine. I had nothing to do with this, and that's the alpha and omega on it, really. I think, a number of the statements that were taken were from people who the guards had information on a number. It was suggested that I hadn't been introduced to the victim. Well, I was never introduced to one of the statements which said that came from a man who was facing a prosecution for possession and growing marijuana.
Yeah.
And he got a very light sentence, so they were playing with people. Nothing I could say to them was going to persuade them. They had decided to put me in the frame, even though there was no evidence,
And have you been treated better by Gardaí since, would you say?
Oh, well, I mean, my dealings with them have been relatively limited, but the Newbury Guard to me seemed to be a completely different, a very good, type of person, but there was a small cohort of people in Skull, and they're still there.
Yeah.
And I'm able to forgive them their trespasses against me, because I'm like that.
Yeah.
Who either chose to believe or chose to perpetuate the lie that I was the murderer. So what I would say is Guru Mila Mohagat and Slan Lat and Abu and Ishfei Jaling.
In 2021, 2 documentaries were released on the murder of Sophie Toscan Du Plantier. The Netflix documentary entitled Sophie, A Murder in West Cork was produced with the assistance of Sophie Toscan Du Plantier's family. The documentary series places more emphasis on interviews with her family, in particular with her son, than it does on mismanagement in the Garda investigation and the point of view of Ian Bailey. Jim Sheridan's documentary, Murder at the Cottage, features lengthy interviews with Bailey, where he reiterates his innocence throughout. Bailey also informed me that Jim Sheridan is working with him on another documentary on the case. The murder of Sophie Toscan Du Plantier was one of the most abhorrent acts to have ever been committed on the island of Ireland. Sophie was brutally murdered in cold blood at the entrance to her holiday home, for no apparent reason. The question of who murdered Sophie has never been definitively answered. Perhaps we will never know the full truth of what happened to Sophie in her final moments on this earth. The Garda Síochána Ombudsman report has left the public with a myriad of unanswered questions. Why did items of evidence go missing in Garda custody, such as the gate to Sophie's home, which potentially held crucial DNA evidence? Why did a member or members of the Irish police force decide to manually remove pages from their investigation documents which may have held information crucial to identifying the killer? Why was it made out as though Ian Bailey was definitely the murderer when his DNA and blood were never found anywhere at the crime scene? Why did a key witness in this case retract her statements identifying Ian Bailey at numerous locations around the time of Sophie's murder and allege that she was bullied into making these statements? Why were there no fingerprints or DNA found at Sophie's home? It is worth noting that in January 2023, the Irish Mirror published an article stating that the Gardaí had uncovered new information which may help identify Sophie's killer. However, the accuracy of this article has not been properly verified. It is also worth mentioning a German man by the name of Karl-Heinz Walny. Karl was a musician who lived approximately a mile away from Sophie's house. He lived on his own following the breakdown of his marriage. He was in a pub in Skull playing songs on the night that Sophie was murdered. He later returned home on his own, but allegedly had no further alibi. Shortly after Bailey was arrested for the first time in February 1997, Karl committed suicide. He allegedly left a friend a suicide note which contained the line, "I have done something terrible." At the time, he denied ever knowing or interacting with Sophie. This murder mystery leaves us with 2 distinct possibilities. The first possibility is that Ian Bailey brutally killed Sophie Toscan Du Plantier all those years ago, and due to a combination of Garda incompetence and errors in collating evidence, the Irish police were never able to prove that Bailey did it. The second possibility is that Ian Bailey was not the killer, and he was framed for a heinous crime that he had absolutely nothing to do with, and has since witnessed his life fall apart before his eyes. Perhaps we will never truly know what happened to Sophie Toscan Du Plantier in her final few moments, as many of the Gardaí investigating the case at the time have since passed away. It is my sincere hope that the ongoing cold case review sheds light on Sophie Toscan Du Plantier's death and the individual who caused it.